Welcome back to the podcast, y'all. I have so been looking forward to today's episode because it is very, very special because it's something that's very, very brand new that I haven't done yet on the podcast, but it is a nerdy way that I live my life. Today, we're having the very first book chat, and I have brought on a friend of mine, Chris Goodman. He is the amazing, and I need a bigger word than amazing husband to my friend and coach, Lindsay. He's an executive life and business coach and now a friend of mine. And I'm so excited to have him here with us. Chris, say hi.
Hi, everybody, and thank you, Kayla, for having me. I'm excited to geek out with you today.
Yes, I am too. Give everybody like a little bit of who you are, what you do, what do you want to share with the people?
For today, it's enough to know that I got the coaching bug back in like 2014 and 15 because I quit law school, didn't know what I was going to do. I hated law school. I hated what I was doing at the time. And that had been my dream for 7 straight years, was to become a lawyer. So I felt this real feeling of like being lost, just not sure what I was going to do next. And then I found real estate, went all in, and became a real estate agent working with one of the biggest teams in town. I'm in the Southern Indiana, Louisville, Kentucky area. And in the world that I was in, the Keller Williams world, which we'll talk about because of the book we're going to get into, coaching, training, mentoring, it is a currency that they live and die by. And so I gobbled it up, and I was all in because they had this perspective that nobody can hit their peak performance or their best without some kind of coach or mentor. So I immediately just bought into that and started working with and coaching with the best in real estate. And that turned into meeting all kinds of coaches all over the country. And one day that turned into meeting this woman named Lindsay. and, and I had been coaching real estate agents. So if you can get the mental picture here, I was a successful real estate agent turned coach to real estate agents and / recruiting agents to our team. So my gig was like hyper specific to real estate coaching. And when I met Lindsay, she was a life coach, still is. And I literally said, what the F is a life coach? Like, what does that even mean, right? Mm-hmm. And we met for a coffee. I tried to recruit her to our team.
It's the cutest meet cute ever.
Yeah, we met for a coffee in I think January or February of 2017. We didn't talk for months, and then we went on our first date in April of 2017. And by July 2017, just a few months later, I quit real estate, started my own life coaching business, and we have both done that ever since and never looked back. And so this book has been with me throughout that whole ride. When I left law school and started real estate, my mentor left this book on my doorstep. And it was so cool because I'd never heard anything about it. I knew it was kind of a big deal in the circles we were in, and it was fresh at the time. It had only been out for, I think, 6 months. And it literally changed how I think, how I make decisions in my personal life and in my business life. And to this day, every single client I take gets a copy of this book.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's why I had to have you on here. This book, thank you for sharing all that. But this book, it's been a long time because I love to read. I read all the time. I probably read 2 books at a time, usually one for fun and one for learning. But it has been a long time since I've read a book that had so many things that were more like new, blow my mind open versus like reaffirming to like what I know or how I work or what I do. And this book, which by the way, for everybody listening, is called The One Thing. And even the title of it, and the only reason why I actually got this book was because of you, because I knew it was your favorite. And the title of it in general is just like kind of goes against how I live my life, like the one thing, because I am a very much do all the things type of person. And I think that's why reading this book gave me so much different perspective, so many things that challenged what I thought. Like, I think there's a few chapters that are like rules, and I was like, oh, sound like things I live by. And they break them all down. And so it's really I thought it was a really super great book. So I'm so excited to dive in as you being an expert with the book. You've been using it for years and years and years, and I read it, what, like last month? And I have all my notes on it, but to get your perspective and hear how you use it. So you already kind of described how you found out about it. You came from real estate, which the authors are in real estate, and that's why they wrote this, right?
Correct. Yeah, the main author is Gary Keller. He's the co-founder of Keller Williams Realty, which is an international company. I think 200,000-ish people and
Wow.
700 plus offices around the world. Major organization.
So he knows success.
He knows
We
success,
can
right? He's
say
a
safely.
billionaire. He's consistently in the top two, three most influential people in real estate every year, and he's known as a massive visionary, somebody
Hmm.
who's thinking 50, 100 years down the line. And his co-author Jay Papasan is an editor, and they've worked on multiple books together.
Hmm.
Jay really got some. I don't want to speak for him, but got some creativity in this one that he didn't necessarily have in the earlier ones, and had so much input into it that, in his words, he wants to infect the world with this
Hmm.
philosophy because
Oh.
he's seen how effective it is, especially in the business environment.
Hmm.
So they run a retreat for couples. Lindsay and I went to the first edition of that. It's a lot of fun down in Austin, Texas. And it shows you how to, like you were saying, even though there's a lot of projects and a lot of things you want to have your hands in, and we're like that, right? We're passionate people, we're
Hmm.
energetic people, and we want to do a lot of things. They show you how to compartmentalize these and prioritize them in a way that you can focus, because it's so easy today to be distracted and work all over the
So
place.
easy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So especially in real estate, because you're being pulled in every direction constantly,
Mm.
and problems are coming at you 360 degrees, which
Yeah.
translates very well to pretty much any small business owner.
That's what I was going to say. I was thinking I have a good friend back in Portland who was a real estate agent, and it's the breadth of knowledge you need to have and the depth of each of those, like things that you need to know as a real estate agent, in terms of all the way from like all the mortgage lending and things like that, and then like actual structural and construction of homes and stuff. There's so much where I can imagine real estate agents have like feel the exact opposite of the one thing. They're like, no, this is a 1,000 thing career.
Yeah. Yeah, there are something like 290 steps. If you count every single thing that has to happen from the first moment you talk to a real estate agent to getting to that closing, something like 290. I think it's 292 if I remember right. Anyway, it doesn't matter. There's a whole lot of things that have to
Hmm.
happen. And so, yeah, if you're dealing with 10 or more clients at a time, think of the exponential effect on your attention and your productivity. So, the systems in this book have, since then, especially, really helped me consolidate what actually matters and focus on those two, maybe two to three things.
Okay, so I have so many questions that I want to ask you, but before we get into, because I do want to get into like the systems and things like that, but the first thing that I want to ask is, do you have a favorite chapter or a favorite quote, or is there something, and maybe you've read this more than once, I'm sure you have, that like sings to your soul? Like, what is it?
As far as reading it more than once, I'll totally admit I read it probably three times the first year that I had it,
Hmm.
led book clubs on it. Every time I traveled to Texas for a training with the KW guys, I read it. So I've probably read it 10, 15 times, somewhere like that
So it's like me
in the
and Harry
past
Potter.
10 years. Yeah, exactly. It's the wizardry that I love in this book.
Yes, the
Uh,
magic.
and I'll tell you my favorite quote from the whole book, other than the main question that the book centers around. My favorite quote, I'll read it to you. It's from page 188.
Oh, I
And
have
it
my
says,
book, I can flip straight to
yeah,
it.
you can go straight to it. Ideally, a coach can coach you on how to maximize your performance over time. This is how the very best become the very best. And I don't know that I've heard coaching put so succinctly before
Hmm.
that if you really want to operate at a high level that you like, sometimes we can't see past our own potential, you need some kind of coach, mentor, or advocate to help draw that out of you. And this whole book is based on that philosophy, right? That we can see further than you because
Hmm.
we've stretched ourselves this way. So I really like that approach. And as far as a favorite chapter or section, for me, it's the counterbalancing idea,
Mm.
because we in business, we tend to feel like we need to balance it all. Or even in home life, we feel like we really have to have a sense of what you hear all the time is work-life balance. And this book just puts an axe right through that idea, right? Literally says balance is a lie. It's a
Yeah.
myth. It doesn't exist. Even when you see somebody, like my favorite example that I've heard Jay use is when you see a skier going down the moguls, they make it look so smooth, right? Like it looks like they're just effortlessly going down the mountain, even though if you slowed it down and zoomed in, you would see their hips counterbalancing and their ankles counterbalancing and their skis knocking off the snow and the ice. And you would see what would be pretty chaotic. But when you zoom out, it is a symphony of counterbalancing. And so that's what I really work to show my clients, that you can have all of these things, this wonderful home life, this very successful business, and have a real deep impact in the world. You may not be able to do them all perfectly simultaneously all the time.
Yes.
You need to learn to counterbalance and go all in on this one thing at a time, and then come back and do it over here. So for perfect example, right now, I'm not playing with my kids. I'm not talking with my wife. I'm not checking my email. I'm not checking texts. I am all in right here, fully present and nowhere else, prepared to do nothing else but give you everything I've got right here. And that is a different way of thinking than the majority of the world would want us to operate right now, right?
Yeah.
Because we're tricked into believing we can juggle all of these things and do them all well all the time. And it's a myth. It's just
And
false.
I think for me, as somebody who I've always, and I might have to like change my thought about this, but I've always described myself as and I think they even talk about this saying in the book, but the jack of all trades, a master of none. But then there is more to that. But I didn't know that there was more to that until recently. But I used to always call myself a master of all trades, because I do believe that at a high level, I can function doing many things at one time. But I've learned now, as I've gotten further into business, that I'm understanding that my mastery might just be higher. Like it is a higher mastery, but it's still not then what my potential could be if I focused really well. But so I think that's really funny. And I think one of the things, to kind of what you said, this book gave me so many examples that made me say, oh, duh. Like, oh, duh, focus matters so much. And it made me reflect back on myself. Like, when I was running, and I was a very good runner, and I was getting like, the fad terms now are quantum leaps in my running ability, is when I was obsessed with running. I was reading about running. I made all my food in the way I ate about my running. I was running all day. I was talking to anybody who would talk to me about running. I was in running communities. And when I was focused on it so much is when my running got really, really great. And I became very, very good at it. And when I think about all the things, same when I was a dancer, right? Same when I was a teacher, my skill, when I had like a focus on one thing, then I realized how much my skill grew. But it's like we forget that because the world and society talks all about doing it all, juggling it all, being like, and as the female perspective, a mom, a CEO, and then still have time to wash your laundry. Like, I don't know. Yeah.
You're spot on though. That's exactly what it feels like, it to specialize in something. There's another great book, not to get too off topic, but one called Blink by Malcolm Gladwell. And they use this example of a series of doctors being shown the same x-ray, and nobody can really figure out what's going on. And so they call the one guy who is the absolute renowned specialist. This is his one thing that he does. And they put it in front of him, and before he blinks, he's figured out the problem. Because he's seen it and done it so many times, and he's put such concentrated effort and focus into this, what we would say, one thing here. And so it makes a very practical example of what this looks like when you start to think this way and systematize your efforts in such a way that you become specialized. And now, granted, you're right, you may not be the world's greatest runner and swimmer and pickleball player,
I'm working on pickleball.
Yeah, well, aren't we all? But that's what you have to decide is, if you could be a master of any one given area, which would you like it to be, instead of dabbling in these multiple areas?
Which I think is, for me, and probably a lot of people, a hard question. But then that leads me back to kind of the quote that you said is your favorite. I love that you chose that quote. When I read that quote, it stuck out to me as well, because I do think one of the things, as you were talking about moving forward in life, and how a coach, like you said, we've been there, we've already stretched ourselves in this way so that we can help with that. But I think the other piece too that I say all the time about coaching that I think is so powerful is we are just the objective observer to someone's emotional life. And when you step out of that and you see that, it really helps you be able to see, even for that question I just said, like, what is the thing that what is the sport I'd want to be interested in? Because right now I'm like emotionally like, this one would be fun, that one would be fun. But a coach could look at me and be like, it's so obvious to me that the one thing you talk about most, the one thing you actually have bought supplies for and done, or like that you've done this, is this. And then it just helps you see beyond that. And I think, so I like that quote that you also pulled out. So as you were sharing your quote and the chapter, you also were mentioning, okay, this is kind of how you describe this to your client and how you use this with your client. So you buy this book for every single one of your clients that you have.
Correct.
And I'm curious, so how do you use it then as the tool? Like, tell us more about that.
Well, there's an ancient quote, and I think the guy's name was, I don't even know how to say it, but Heraclitus. Heraclitus, something like that.
Oh, like photographic memory.
So here's the deal. This quote perfectly summarizes why every client gets it. No man steps into the same river twice, for the river has changed, and so has he. Mm-hmm. So no matter where they are in their life and their business, I can find something, one of the tools in this book, to apply to them. And even if they use it for a year and we keep coaching, they will be a different person. So when they step back into this book a year later, they will see it differently, or there will be something else applicable to them. There are very few books out of the hundreds that I've read that are that universally applicable. So that's one of the main reasons I like it. As far as how do I help them implement it, a couple of key things. The number one thing from the book, it's called The One Thing because it centers on one question, which is, what is the one thing I can do such that by doing it, everything else is easier or unnecessary? And every single word of that question is hand chosen, carefully chosen, to reflect the specific nature that we're going after. What is that one thing that we can do such that by doing that, everything else becomes easier or unnecessary? When you've got a CEO of 30, 40, 50 people and millions of dollars on the line and huge decisions every single day, it feels like a 360-degree assault. Mm-hmm. So that question helps them slow down and focus into, okay, what is that one thing that would make everything else easier today? Is it letting go of this one problem employee? Is it taking a huge risk and putting ourselves out there in front of our dream client? Is it, this was a conversation yesterday with one of my coaching clients, is it taking a freaking nap?
Yeah.
Because you haven't stopped for weeks on end and you're starting to burn out?
Yeah.
I had another conversation on Monday with a client. He hadn't eaten all day. And I asked him, I just zoomed out and I said, look, all this stuff aside, what is that one thing that you can do that would make everything else easier right now? And he goes, honestly, I just need like a full meal. Mm-hmm. And he was a different animal after that. So if you haven't already seen this trick, if you take the cover off of the book, if you have the hard copy, if you take the cover off, it's an actual domino to give you a visual representation of what is that first domino that you can line up, that if you just knock that first one over, all these other dominoes fall down behind it. And that's how I really want these clients to think, is to start organizing their life, their business, their priorities in a way that we can just focus on one certain thing. For instance, a client has an international PR agency. They work all over the world. They're in the top 5 in their industry in the world. And for months, we were working on figuring out what is that one domino. Hundreds of ideas from him, his team, from me. The one he decided on was, if I could find somebody who is absolutely the peak of a sales professional on a global level in our industry, who speaks this language, who's the perfect match for a sales role to grow our organization, I think that would be the one thing. It took us 3 months to get there. It took another month and a half to figure out, identify candidates, screen them,
Hmm.
interview them. And then probably another month, honestly, because it's such a high level position to vet that person. So we're what, 5 months in?
Yeah.
But now that that person is on, it's like rocket fuel and everything is taking
Mm.
off. And so it can be confusing because it sounds like, are you asking me to only do one thing? Like I have a lot more
Yeah.
dominoes than one.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
And trust me, I get it. I have two kids under 3 years old. My wife and I run
One's
separate.
brand new.
Yeah, yeah. One is he turns 16 weeks on Saturday.
Ooh.
And so things are chaotic, and we both run our own businesses. Lots of things going on. There's definitely more than one thing happening at a time. But the way this book shifts your thinking is to identify that that's fine and that's fair and that's always going to be the case. What is that one thing though that makes everything else easier?
Well, and that's the when you first read the book and they're kind of talking about it, I think they don't deliver the second half of the sentence till a little bit later because they're just describing the idea of focus in the first half of the book. And when they delivered the whole sentence in whatever chapter that's in, which I think is like halfway through, um, and adding the easier and unnecessary, that's like what blew my mind because when we think about I don't know, like client acquisition or all sorts of different things, you have 85 ideas of how you could do it. And you're like, okay, but what's the one thing that would make all those other ideas not needed or even easier to do? And it's like, okay, that's the thing you do first. And adding that on, I think really helped me change like that's what gave me all the buy-in because I'm like, oh, it's not telling me don't do stuff. It's not telling me they're only focused on one thing. It's telling me you are making your life easier by doing this. You are taking other unnecessary things. And I think that's been one of my personal battles in business is I try on all of the things. And so I try on a lot of unnecessary stuff to find the needle mover. But if you just clarify the question more, you can like find the needle mover a little more without having to experiment with it. And so I think that that's really awesome. A question that I have for you is, um, or one other thing I'll say first is I like how you gave that example of you guys took 3 months to figure out what the one thing was for your client. Because in the book, it's like if you don't know your one thing is to find the one thing. And I'm like, that's so powerful. That alone is so powerful. Because I've been the person who's like, I don't know the one thing. So my first thing to do is experiment. And it's like, I could save myself a lot of time if I thought about it maybe and researched a little bit more. But you also gave examples of sticking to the one thing and kind of moving between a what's the one thing right now and for instance the example with eating, but then also what's the one thing that lasted for 5-6 months before you saw. So how do you, because that's been one of my kind of confusing things of like I'm very much a rule follower. I like A pluses. And so if I'm following my one thing every day, I'm like, but today I feel like the one thing should be maybe something different. Like how much do you reassess and ask yourself that question?
Constantly, if I'm honest, because it feels like it could change at any given moment. And in a world where we're literally, so I'll use a real world example. I have a client who is in the middle of an exit. He owns and runs about 4 businesses. And in our work together, in the first month or two we were working together, we were working to figure out what is his one thing. Because he's at a point where he's been sort of ejected out of the business in a good way. He doesn't have to run the day to day. He has teams running things for the different businesses. And he was feeling a little lost, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, well, what is like usually my one thing would be jump in and fix all these problems, but the team's doing that. So now I don't know what my one thing is. And so as we just kept exploring, he realized if I sold one of these companies, it would make everything else easier for funding the next project, for
Mm.
getting some of the headaches out of his world that pop up from time to time. It's taken 10 months to get that business structured for an exit, find a buyer, line up the buyer, 30 days of extensions on closing, like,
Mm-hmm.
so don't get me wrong. There were still lots of things happening in that world of his where, yeah, that's his focus. His main one thing right now is that exit. However, these other things still have to be juggled. So it shifts from a question of what is your one thing to how do you prioritize your different one things. And you break it out almost like eating an elephant. Once you identify the elephant, it's like, okay, so the first thing we'll have to do is probably take a leg, right?
Yeah.
Or whatever it may be,
Whatever.
whatever you decide there. Terrible example. But nonetheless, so you would have your idea of like, okay, I've got this one thing that I know is the big deal. And then I have to start asking, okay, how do I want these dominoes to fall down? And when you work, as they say in the book, in order of priority like that, everything else starts to, as an effect, you've worked on the cause, as an effect, things start to fall in order. And that is, if I'm honest, the time consuming part of this process is identifying that.
That's
However,
what I was just going to ask. Yeah.
yeah, but it's just like if you said, hey, John and I want to go to London. It's like, okay, you got your one thing. You know where you're going. Now, what's the next one thing you could do that would make that trip, like planning that trip, easier or necessary? Well, we'd have to pick a date. Okay, that's step one. All right, after the date, what's the next one thing? Well, then we'd have to book plane tickets. All right, that's the second thing. And so you start thinking this way, and before you know it, you have your top three things that you don't need to worry about where you're going to eat on the second day you're there if you don't have your plane ticket booked or the
Yes.
date chosen. So in their world, in the one thing world, they call it goal setting to the now. And there's a really great chapter about this where and if you ever get curious, you can watch Jay Papasan's TED Talk where he describes how he came up with this idea of reverse engineering goals. He was sitting there eating breakfast, having cereal, and he looked at the puzzle on the back of the box and he saw, oh, the way we do puzzles, solve puzzles, is we start at the end.
Yeah, we look. Oh, yeah, you look at the whole picture first.
Because otherwise, you're doing what you said earlier. You're experimenting. You're going one route, dead end, another route, dead end, one route, another dead end. The way we figure them out fast is we start at the end and reverse engineer. So he said, what if we set the big goal, the someday goal, the when I'm 75 years old goal, the when this business turns 10, this when we help 1 million people, what does that look like? Let's get clear on that picture as clear as we can, and then go, okay, so if that's the case, what has to happen in 10 years or 5 years or 3 years or 1 year from today? And this is great for my clients because they have so much going on. They're not often thinking about what this business needs to look like at the end of 2025. They're just trying to get through today.
Yeah.
So one of the most effective exercises I take them through is let's design your org chart for 3 years from now. What do you want this thing to look like? Do you want a mean, lean, efficient machine, or do you have an empire that's going to require some scaling? And either way, it starts to shift like, okay, if that's the case, then what do we need to have done by the end of 2025? If that's the case, what do we need to do this month? And we just keep breaking it back down. And we can go all the way down to what has to happen at 9 a.m. tomorrow if you want to get that granular. But again, it helps give you a sense of how to accomplish something really massive. Tesla, or not Tesla, SpaceX, perfect example. Right, those huge rockets they're building. They had to have some kind of vision for what do we want this thing to look like? Oh, we want it to come back from space and land itself. That's a different conversation than let's build a cool rocket.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so when I did this, so after I read the book, I did this for myself one time, and I actually have my like breakdown chart of how I funneled backwards from how you kind of send it. Like your one thing is like your purpose, and then it breaks down into the priorities. But where I found that the time was the first notches felt really easy. They were like, oh, well, obviously this. Oh, well, obviously this. But then as you got down and you're like, okay, when you get to the lower, more, like you said, as much as like 9 a.m. tomorrow morning, I feel like the place before 9 a.m. tomorrow morning and after like, what will I do this quarter? There's so many options that level I felt like was really tricky. Do you see that with your clients where there's like a space where there's so many things that then how do you decide for that?
Yeah, you just have to pick one that you think is actually going to be the most effective. The backstory to the Millionaire Real Estate Agent, which was the precursor to this book, Gary, the co-founder of Keller Williams, said, what are some of the best ideas we could come up with that would help us hit this massive goal? And I forget what it was, to be honest. I think it was to be the number one real estate agency by volume at the time. So let's just go with that for the sake of example. Like, what's going to be our one thing to take us to that? So he was using that language way before this book was ever written. And everybody came up with great ideas, and they whittled something like 100 ideas down to the top 10. Mm-hmm. Okay, so how do we pick from 10 great ideas what we're all going to agree is the thing that's going to carry us through to this next big deal? And they all decided collectively, as if I remember right, that if Gary wrote a book about how to become a millionaire real estate agent, not just a successful agent, but a millionaire real estate agent, and this was back in like 2002. So at the time, that was a big deal, right? Like nowadays, millionaires, not, it's like, yeah, you're going to need to do that to be successful. Mm-hmm. But imagine somebody blazing a trail saying any agent that comes into our company can be a millionaire if they just follow the systems in this particular book. And the idea was if we do that, then people will flock to us because we'll be able to prove that our systems work, and we'll be able to mint different millionaires and show the world, hey, this is the organization to be at. So that's what they agreed on, and that's what they ran with. And guess what? It worked.
It worked. And what I love about that example too, that I think about is, and while reading this, is the unending, like non-wavering belief that it would work. And I believe that too. Like they always say, like, whatever you choose, whatever you work it, if you work it, it will work, right? Like if you put that focus into it, it will be successful. But that was like a multi-year project, like writing a book in itself. But didn't they do massive research? Like they interviewed so many people like how many years did it probably take to put that book out? And so that patience and delay to the success.
But this is the, and I mean this in a positive way, the madness behind the genius of Gary Keller. I think they wrote that book in 100 days.
What? Oh, so they.
Yeah. So, and again, and I apologize to the KW world if I'm mischaracterizing anything. But again, it's about thinking big and acting big. You know, and so even if you strip all the examples out of this and you just leave with that, if I can think bigger and take a more massive action step in the right direction, it's all going to work out. Everything's going to fall down behind it. Instead of this scattered approach of, I'm going to check my email and then I'm going to respond to the text and then it's going to be lunchtime and I'm going to go do that. And then you're left 3 weeks later with no results.
Yeah. And I think that's one thing that I really loved. I have a ton of quotes about that, where so often people think that, like they said in the book, big results, our brain is trained to think that big is hard and complex. And it's like, it's not. We are just going to write a book. Like we can focus, we can simplify it. And that's the point of the one thing. And I think I have a ton of things right here starred that another thing that I thought was really awesome that I think was a misconception for myself when they were talking about that idea of like going big, you can't be afraid to think big, which I don't think I've ever thought small, but this is where it identified things I didn't know about, like didn't realize about my own thinking. Was it said that doing something in a new way doesn't necessarily, or in the way you need to, doesn't necessarily lay the foundation for the very next step. And I've always kind of viewed it a little bit more linear, like layers. And it's like, but you are doing one thing and building those skills. They might not necessarily be transferable because everything is its own combination. And I felt like that was really freeing to also think about that, because I think the way I viewed business is like everything I do now will grow and grow and grow upon each other, which it's not that it doesn't, but I liked that it was like, don't order off the menu, like build the combination, create the success, dream big, think bigger. Don't worry about it being hard or complex, because that will just make it hard and complex. And it's okay if you're like doing something brand new, and in fact, do something brand new.
You're spot on. It's the first year that I read this book and set a big one thing goal. It was sell as many units in real estate, because I was in production at the time, and send the signal to our local market that this real estate team is different. And if you come here, you can go from 0 to successful in 1 year. And to our market, that was something like I needed to make somewhere like $75,000 to $100,000 and sell more than 5 million in volume on my own. And I just had to look because I had forgotten. I sold 38 units and 6 million and got rookie of the year the first year in business, going from no real estate training, no real estate knowledge, or very little anyway, to that in 1 year. And we thought, well, that will set us up to recruit better talent. And sure enough, it did. And I was able
Yeah.
to get out of production 1,000 days later because we had proof. We had all of these dominoes lined up. Like, look at what we did. Look what you can do. We have it right here for you. Just come on board. We'll take care of the rest. And so, yeah, it doesn't feel like that in the moment because there is so much uncertainty around. Like, I think this is going to work, and I'm trusting this is going to work. But you're also, in the book, they say aim high to hit the mark. If you're like, let's say I missed and I quote only sold 4 million and 30 units. Okay, that's still a hell of a first year for somebody. So yeah, again, there is no perfect system, and you have to work whatever system you adopt to get great results. I've just found that this is the simplest system for somebody to drop in and go, I want to get better results. What do I need to do?
Yeah, I love it. I'm totally a convert. And I realize though that I have to like practice this so much as being like new to my brain for the way that I work. But one of the things that I was also thinking about, as you were saying, you kind of just have to pick it and choose and believe and trust that it's going to work. And that makes me think of, that's actually a really cool place to be, even though it feels stressful to someone like me who's like, I just want to know the answer, know my action plan, when you have all of those decisions. But when you're there, you basically get to choose the one also that you like the best. You're like, if I think 8 things will work, which one will be the most fun? Which one will I want to do every day? Which one will I like? Like, so for me, one of the things, my one thing, basically is me talking about stuff. And I'm like, I could do this all day. So I'm like, yeah, that is what my one thing is going to be, because that's also something that feels really good and really fun to me. And it's on my list of stuff that's going to make my goal happen. So I really, really love that.
Jump in on that?
Yeah.
There's a podcast called The Diary of a CEO, and I just read that they hit like 1 billion listeners.
Wow.
Yeah, that for anybody in the podcast world, that's an insane metric.
Yeah.
The fascinating thing is he did it for something like 7 years before I think he even had 300,000. And then the numbers, the hockey stick growth after that came on. And he was talking about how he would record dozens of episodes and get just a trickle of listeners for months on end, and it felt like he was speaking into the void all the time. So I do think you have to be mindful that if you're thinking very big, yeah, the first leg of that journey can be overwhelming or extremely difficult because it's different. It's more intense than you've been approaching, the way you've been approaching in the past. It can be lonely, especially if you're at the top of your business and people around you are looking at you like, why are you trying to do this? I keep picking on old me in real estate and my mentor, Todd, and people would ask us all the time, they're like, why do you want to set this big of a goal? Do you know how hard that's going to be? And we're like, do you know what's on the other side of that?
Yeah.
Do you know what bliss is on the other side of this goal? Once this domino falls, do you know how great it's going to be?
Well, and I was thinking about that as we were talking about thinking big, is this book does really, one, inspire people to do that. But I would say, I mean, if you were to give a percentage of people in the world who think that way, because a lot of people are like, that sounds really hard. Like, you want to work that much? You don't want to just like sleep more or something? Like, I don't know, but I think that is something that go-getters will combat all the time, is other people being like, why don't you just chill for a while? Why don't you just take some time off?
Well, I will say it doesn't always have to be hard like that. One of my one thing moments was when I decided to double my rates for coaching. And I'm in different coaching circles, from people who charge $100,000 a year for one-on-one coaching to people who charge several $100s a month. And when I said, I'm going to charge essentially $5,000 a month as a minimum for clients, people were like looking at me like, you're on drugs. Who's going to pay that? Blah, 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 blah. It's going to be so hard to find those people. I have found it's the opposite. Once I find the right person and they see the value of phenomenal coaching, it's a no-brainer. And that made my life so much, quote, easier, because instead of having double or triple the client load, now I'm getting so much more done in a fraction of the time. And then the next extension of that is, of course, group or program work, because it's about scaling that impact. But for me, I was like, I don't want to do courses yet. I don't want to do groups just yet, at least all the time. I love my one-on-one practice. So how is it that I can get to that end of the road where I have this thriving, successful one-on-one practice and also hitting financial goals and being able to give back to the world the way I want? I have to raise rates to $5,000. If I can do that one thing, and then the next priority is find the clients to fit that, then everything else falls down behind it.
Yeah.
So it isn't always about, I mean, the challenge may seem difficult, but it's kind of like anything. You usually make a mountain out of a molehill at
Yes.
first, right?
And even thinking about raising prices, that it's literally the easiest thing. You literally just go onto your website or wherever, onto your checkout, and you just change it, right? It's literally the easiest thing. But the mountain is in your brain, right? Of being like, what other people saying? No one will pay that. And you're like, actually, people who are using the one thing to make millions and millions of dollars have no problem paying me $5,000
Well,
a month.
and that's what I really started to discover was how much drama I had in my mind, because with the right client, like the guy I was talking about with the exit earlier, when he got started and I took a quick assessment of his business, I said, you're missing a key person. You need a CFO, a slash, accountant that can see the world the way that is possible for you. Made that connection for him, and he saved $14,000 a month and 4 to 6 hours per week of work.
Totally worth it.
What
Like
is
beyond
that
worth it.
ROI for? Yeah. So and
Yeah.
that was one conversation. So yeah, again, it's this reverse engineering. It's the sort of getting used to the language of the book, the systems of the book, experimenting with it. There is a learning curve there, and you got to be a little bit patient with figuring that out, just like any new skill.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot with this, and I think I am a patient person, and the way that I'm a patient person, I think because okay, let me maybe change that. I think I'm an impatient person who's had a lot of coping, who uses a lot of coping mechanisms to become patient. But this is where I feel when I'm thinking about, as we were just talking about the Diary of a CEO guy, how it took him like 7 years for his podcast to become productive. Like that is so, when I look at that, I am in awe of his ability to show up for that long and retain belief for that long and keep going for that long. And so I think often when we think about these really big goals, like I have just in the last podcast episode that just went live this week, I've shared my personal big goal. And when I think about it, I'm like, well, of course, I would love for that to just happen by the end of this year, right? And it's to have a coaching business makes $1 million a year and helps at least 500 coaches a year, so that I can give back in different ways. And there's a long story. Everybody can go listen to that other episode. But I have to remind myself that this probably or could be a 3-year goal. And I think what actually makes it hard for me is and I think this is very different because you work with a lot of people who are, and for lack of a better way to differentiate, quote unquote, real hard businesses in business world versus like Instagram businesses. And in the Instagram world, everybody is like, well, by tomorrow you could be making $1 million a year. And so there's this, it's almost like the Instagram world is teaching us to not have patience and almost teaching us and showing that it makes you feel kind of wrong if you aren't, quote unquote, quantum leaping into the next thing.
Choose your hard, right? What I've found is a lot of those quote influencers who are making $1 million overnight or whatever, that's fine. They're not netting that. Most of the time, their net is garbage because they've put all of this money into ads, or they have scaled way too far out in their payroll, and they're left with a net of $10,000 after, quote, I made $1 million. But people don't always see that. And so they're comparing themselves and their results to this facade of a business. And not to cut anybody down, because we never know unless they're giving us transparency into their numbers. But I have just like I personally know people who sell from that platform of I made 1 million or 10 million, and they are in gross debt, or or they were working 90 hours a week, or whatever it may be, and it's not as glorious as they're making it seem. So number one, I think you have to do your homework on who you're listening to and how the reality of the situation unfolds. But also it comes back down to you and what do you want? Because I've found with top performers, they don't often slow down to ask that question, like, what do I want this to look like? Versus what should this look like, or how do I do this? It's a different frame to come at it from. You could build your ideal business. I consulted with a company, I guess it was about 4 years ago now, and now they're ready for an exit. And we were talking about, what do you want life to look like? And like, well, we want to sell the business. I'm like, I know you want to sell the business. What do you want life to look like? And then we start designing their free time and their passion projects that they want to do while they're, quote, retired. That conversation had a dramatic impact on how they want to exit this business and the price that they want for that business. So again, I think you need a coach to take you past where you can currently see, and ask those tough questions, or at least impactful and transformative questions of what do you want? Let's design this in a way that fits your lifestyle, your pace, the people you want to surround yourself with, instead of, well, so-and-so said I can build $1 million business this way, so I'm going to go do that.
Yeah. And I think Lindsay has done a good job of that, actually. For me to shout her out is just like the way I grew up. And that's another story for another time. And a little bit of it. But it's like I never had the ability to ask myself want. And, it was always like, what needs, need. And so to transform and be like, and then my previous career was a teacher, and that's definitely nothing. You don't get, there's very little autonomy in teaching. And so it was a really interesting question to ask, which I think was super, super beneficial. So I really, really love that. And then, of course, your one thing could be part of that, could be the one thing for that day, is like,
Yeah. There's a really practical way to get there on page 114. Let me double check. I'm always a little bit fuzzy now that I'm not getting sleep with young children. But if you guys are watching the video, this visual, this definitely informs how I build my life and business. It's what's the one thing for my spiritual life? What's the one thing for my physical health? What's the one thing for my personal life? So you end up with these different sort of tiers of goals. But then you come back to, okay, now what's the one thing that makes all of that easier? And for me, it's usually time. So any time I have a decision point, I'll often ask myself, does this give me time freedom, or does this take time freedom? And if it takes a lot of time freedom without a lot of return, then it's a hell no. Because having time to spend with my kids right now while they're young, having time to spend with my wife because we get so little of it, having time to work out because, again, time is compromised right now. So for me, that, like, I could probably hang that on my wall. I have it burned in my memory, so I don't need to.
Yeah.
But that would be a great way to inform you. Are you actually living life on your own terms and by your own design, or are you being pushed around by your calendar or by somebody else's vision for what your life is supposed to look like?
Yeah, and I love that, because that goes back to also where they're like, your one thing is your purpose, and then it breaks down the smaller one thing or all of the priorities. And so that like goes back to you looking at your purpose for all the things. And so one of the questions I wanted to ask you is how you use this in your life. Because when I saw this section very specifically that you just talked about on page 114, I'm pretty sure I text Lindsay and I was like, I found out how Chris is such a good husband to you. I know he wakes up and he says, what's the one thing I can do to make Lindsay happy today, every day? And I was like, and that has to work. I was just like, there's no way he doesn't do this, because you are so spectacular.
I feel seen. Thank you. But I mean, and truthfully, it doesn't have to be this mountain to climb. Sometimes it's like, you know what, if I just go make her a coffee real fast, that's gonna change the day.
Yeah.
So yeah, it really, thank you for putting it that way too, because I've never really thought about it like that. But I mean, even to the extent that when I start a coaching call and I do my little routine before a call, I'm thinking, I'm here to serve, I'm here to be curious.
Mm-hmm.
What is the one thing I can help this client discover today to help them move through, whatever they're stuck on? And it really does boil down to being effective in the moment. Actually, Gary Keller's definition of success is being appropriate in the moment, which means you may have to abandon those plans that you had for the day because now suddenly this flat tire has to be changed. That's the one thing that you can do to make it to your meeting on time or whatever. So it's tough because the book makes it feel like there's this rigidity of I've identified my one thing, I've identified my purpose and my priorities and how I'm going to be productive with that, and now I got my plan. But then I just got this, like a friend of ours has a small business, and she just found out she's unexpectedly pregnant with her fifth kid,
Oh,
I
wow.
think. And they thought they were completely done. They didn't think it was physically possible for them to have children anymore. So you can imagine her one thing today is different than it was last week,
Definitely.
right?
Definitely.
And so you have to have this flexibility.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, Jeff Bezos talks about this. You have to have a sort of rigidity with the big vision and a flexibility of how you get there.
I
And
love
so,
that.
yeah, you have this, like I'm willing and able to change my plans as long as I know that this one domino leads to the next.
I was just yesterday on the coaches college sessions that I had, which is my program for coaches skills development. We were talking about the process of the coaching call, and we were like, the theme above all of this, or there's a couple different themes, but I was like, one that's really important is adaptability, because you could do step one of the coaching call and find out something that you were not expecting. Like somebody could come and be like, turns out I'm pregnant. And you're like, okay, this changes everything we were going to talk about today. Adapt. Or you might like be going in and you find out something in the third step and you're like, adapt, right? It's in every single step where adaptability is so important in life. And I think as coaches, us modeling that too is really powerful, because I think as an all or nothing person myself, and the world in general, I think leans more all or nothing than it does adaptable. And so I think it's really important to point that out for sure, for sure. Okay, I literally have like 8 more things that I want to say. I love what you said about the appropriate in the moment. I don't remember necessarily reading that in the book, but I do remember a different, I really liked when they spoke about the idea of success when people talk about financial success and what is it. And he says that financial success is, or success is creating enough, whether it's time or money, to just be able to complete what your passion is in the world. And I was just like, that's so good, because then it's a different measurement for everybody. When I think about John as he's moving into being an artist and creative full time, like that's really what our goal is, to be able to fund him to do music as long as he wants. And it's so it doesn't matter like whatever that is, whenever we get there, we'll get there. So I think that's really interesting. Okay, so again, we could talk about this forever, but we're already inching up on an hour, which I can't believe. But is there anything else about this book or something that we haven't said that you're like, the people need to know that we should leave people
Yeah,
with?
I think the time blocking, I don't think we even mentioned
Oh,
that
yeah.
yet. Yeah, this radically transformed how I move through the world.
Mm-hmm.
And I live and die by my calendar, such that I will miss anything if it's not on my calendar. I just won't
Mm-hmm.
show up. If it's not on my calendar, it doesn't exist, kind of thing. So the idea that you block your priorities into your calendar, I had never done that. I had always reacted to things and made my calendar look like a to-do list
Mm-hmm.
instead of saying like, no, this is when this happens. So for instance, when I got started in real estate, I took a class through KW called Bold, and the idea was to be like a really bold agent and really go for what you want your life to look like and your business to look like. And the coach that I had for that course only took his listings on Thursdays.
Mm.
Every single other agent I had ever met would burn their house down to go take a listing right now.
Yeah. Got them everywhere. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
and so we joked that agents became like Pop Tarts, and they're just always going like, "Pop here, I'll go over here, I'll go over here, I'll go over here," instead of designing their world to say, "No, calendar, you're going to serve me.
Mm-hmm.
Thursdays work for me with my kids and my schedule and weekends. That's when I'm going to take my listings. If they don't want to list with me on a Thursday, they're not a good client for me."
Mm-hmm.
So it requires you to step up your confidence to back up your ability, your resourcefulness to back up your life by design. So, for instance, Lindsay and I decided, I don't know, a year and a half or two ago, actually, probably when Eva was born, so probably close to 3 years ago now, that we really didn't want to work on Fridays.
Mm-hmm.
And so now it's our default. We quote, don't work on Fridays. Now, is that always true? Absolutely not. You will find me here and there taking an emergency call from somebody who's got
Mm-hmm.
something on fire. You'll find me doing a podcast once in a while because it's the only day we could get on the calendar. However, the default thought, I have blocked my Fridays to be family days, to be catch-up days, workout days, whatever days, protects 80% more time, if not 90% more time, for those things than by saying, let me see where I can put it in. So it reverse engineers. I'll put it this way. When I was in law school, they kept telling us there's always going to be more work than there is of you as a lawyer.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And that really stuck with me when I went into real estate because it was still true. There was always
Mm-hmm.
more I could do. There was always somebody I could follow up with. If somebody calls me at 9 p.m., I could take that call.
Mm-hmm.
But if my time block says I don't answer work calls after 8 p.m. because there are no actual fires in real estate,
Mm-hmm.
everything else starts to move in place behind it. And you know what the funny thing is? When you start to enforce these boundaries, the world gets the message.
Yes. Well, that's what I was going to say about that guy that did his thing on Thursdays. Because when I was health coaching, I had quite a few real estate agents, and they were, it was a little bit harder to coach them because they felt like I will lose business, I will lose my livelihood if I don't take this call at 9 p.m. and if I don't go to this thing at this time, and I can't. And so I bet that guy that was your coach was like, I was greatly successful with all my calls on Thursdays. I bet he was.
And honestly, he did lose some business.
Mm-hmm.
However, it's a question of what client do you want to work with? The one who respects you and your terms and your boundaries, or one who tramples all over them?
Yeah.
And it's true in coaching. Like I have a hard and fast rule. Clients know if they call in more than 10 minutes late to their call, I'm not going to answer. I'm moving on. Like I get that things happen. And don't get me wrong, there's some grace, like if they're a new client or something, they don't know the rules yet.
Mm-hmm.
But nonetheless, that's a pretty hard and fast rule for me because I'm also leading by example.
Yes.
And guess what happens? When their team starts to show up late to a meeting or late to a call and they get infected with this time blocking, they start enforcing that boundary for themselves. And now the whole team gets the message.
Mm-hmm.
So I like that system as a way of being in the world. Because it really does teach you to protect what's most important to you,
Mm-hmm.
which most people will say is their health, their family, their ability to create success, and their ability to give back in the world. And if we're not protecting those times and prioritizing them, we always end up working out of reaction mode,
Mm-hmm.
and that's never as effective.
No. And I actually have the exact same rule too. I'm like, your call's gone. Well, I'm not sorry. I'm not even sorry. Like, and then, yeah, the same thing, a grace period. Because I think that is, like you said, leading by example. We kind of mentioned that earlier with the flexibility and adaptability. It is so important because I do think that, again, in society in general, people have started to become I'm not sure the word that I want to use. I don't necessarily want to use the word disrespectful or whatever, but I think there is an expectation where even when I think about John when he was working at Nike and email responses, I'm like, there should not be an expectation that you get a response in 15 minutes from the time you receive an email. Like we're building that expectation by doing it, by providing it. And I used to say the same thing for teachers all the time. I'm like, the reason why all teachers are underpaid and overperform and or overwork is because they are allowing that we are allowing that to happen. We all go in an hour and a half early. We all stay 5 hours late. We don't disturb anything because we don't want to ask for more pay. Well, because obviously this is a bigger deal, but I think that is one of the things is like we kind of enable that. And so I think leading by example and showing the boundaries shows, one, it's possible. And I also think from an outside view, I have great respect for somebody when they're like, no, I only take calls these days. I always have super great respect for people who have that boundary. And so I think that is helpful externally for people like your clients, or in real estate, that guy's clients and stuff too, they were probably like, oh, he's serious.
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes they just need permission. Like, oh, I didn't know I could do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
didn't know I could say I don't take calls after 5 p.m.
Yes, I've helped
Right.
so many of my clients do basic things like that. I will also say one of the things that you said about the calendar block is they recommend, and I used to have mixed feelings about this. I'm a morning person, but I know not everybody is. But there is so much science that has shown that the morning for you is the best time, your most productive time. And they break it down in terms of like just decision fatigue, right? Like if you wait to do something by 5 p.m., you've already made so many decisions, your brain's not fresh. So it doesn't mean you have to be up at 5 a.m. doing stuff, which I know you are. But like if other people like to wake up at 9, it's just like the freshness of your brain. So like block your one thing in the morning, your morning.
I like how you approach this. I was talking with a friend who lives in Italy, and he moved there from America. And he was like, people treat creativity a different way here, and it affects their business. And there's a much more laid back approach and this and that. We were talking about it. And I just happened to say, well, all entrepreneurs are creatives first, because we have to have this vision of what we want to create. And he's like, that's pretty good. And we started joking, like, actually, that is pretty good, because it's true. We have this creativity to build something that doesn't exist yet. And then we let it get ratcheted down with the rules of the world, the way it's supposed to look, the expectations of the outside world, clients' expectations. Instead of going, you know what, actually, what's best for me here?
Yeah.
What's best for my client here? Sometimes what's best for a client is not responding quickly. And all my
Yes.
clients, if they listen to this, they know if I think they just need time to think about it, I probably won't respond for 12 to 24 hours,
Yeah.
even if it's a low-hanging fruit answer, because they're just in a mode of panic or something. And I'm working to teach them what we talk about, which is, get a hold of your state, get a hold of yourself, and then come up with an answer, and then go to the outside world and say, what do you think? A long way to get there, but coming back to, I think we're just not doing a good job as entrepreneurs to go, you know what, how do I want to design my calendar? What do I want this ideal life and business to look like? If I could have it any way I want it, if it was all possible, versus what does society say? Oh,
Yep.
I'm going to start a business. I have to work 90 hours a week, and I have to burn out, and I have to fall on the sword of productivity. And all my friends and family will tell me, we miss you. You're different. You're all stressed out. And I'll get to wear this badge of honor saying, I know, I started a business.
Yeah.
It's like, is that what you really want? Is that like, is it? Because if so, cool, go for it. If you're Elon Musk, go for it. If it's not, though, if you know in your heart that that's not the way you want to move through the world, then yeah, I do think you owe it to yourself to read this and start implementing some of these simple systems to avoid that pain.
Yeah. And I think, yeah, this book was so phenomenally helpful for that. And the other thing that I will just add that I've found for myself personally too is, again, as an all or nothing person, I'll set my schedule and I'll be like, this is the perfect dream schedule. And every quarter it's like, but this would be better. And I feel like that's the other thing too, is we forget that it's okay, again, to be adaptable and flexible and look back and be like, oh, something's not working. I'll change it for this quarter. And that's not a bad thing. But I used to have that idea of like, Kayla's changing her schedule again. But really, it's also fine because that's just my business. So
I just wrote this down. I'm going to make a concept out of it. I think there's a difference between abandoning your goals or your priorities and adapting them. Right?
yeah.
Like if you're doing 75 hard, and you're traveling to Dubai and you're going to be on a plane for a really long time, it's going to be hard for you to get that extra workout in. It's different if you just abandon it and go, well, I'll pick it back up next week, versus adapting, like, I'm going to have to do 37 laps up and back in the whatever. So I think that's the key distinction there, right? Is like, are you actually giving up, or are you moving with purpose in a new and more productive direction?
I love this. That's like a little brain nugget that's going to be so super helpful for me to be like, Kayla, you're not abandoning it. I don't know why that's like a thing, but I have that. Like, don't look like you're giving it up. Ugh, I love that. Okay, so this has been so much fun. I have loved this so much. I want to do more book chats. This was so great. But Oh, I was going to ask you that. I was just thinking, like, where can people find you? I know you have your own podcast, and I was like, is Chris going to come with bourbon in his coffee cup for our podcast? Because it's early in the morning.
No, not today. Christmas morning might be different. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah.
Um, well, here, are you asking where people can find me?
Yeah, but it also made me think of that because I'm like, normally on your podcast, you drink bourbon with people as you do it. But where I'm maybe your podcast is not the thing that you want to share, but where can people find you? How can people stay connected with you, ask questions, learn from, and eventually, as you go to share more about abandonment versus adaptability, all of your
That's
concepts?
funny. Well, yeah, I do have the podcast. It's called Bourbon and Breakthroughs, and we sit down with guests and enjoy bourbon and talk about the bourbon and talk about some kind of personal growth or transformative business idea, some kind of coaching thing. That's on pause right now, though, because
Mhm.
th- actually we should have talked about this. I paused the podcast because it wasn't my one thing anymore.
Ah, powerful.
It was becoming some animal that I didn't want to feed because it was robbing me of time from my family, my clients, and what was really more important in that moment. And it was a tough decision to
Mhm.
say, I could keep doing this, I could rearrange things. But I knew every time I went to do that, I was forcing it. I wasn't really all in on that idea. And I was like, deep down, I know this is not my one thing right now. So there are 120 episodes, 130 episodes, something like that, they can go grab. If you don't want to do the podcast thing and you want to just keep up with me and Lindsay and all what we're into, Instagram is where we hang out most of the time. I'm at Goodman Coaching. Lindsay's at Lindsay Mango Coaching. That's her maiden name, Mango.
I was
And then,
wondering if you were going to point that out.
yeah, well, and I still get the question like, did she take your name? Is she actually Lindsay Goodman? I'm like, she's Lindsay Goodman, but Lindsay Mango sticks. Like everybody
Hmm.
knows her as Lindsay Mango. So yeah, if you want to be consistent and engaging with me, that's a good place to find me. And really, though, I'm a relationship guy. I'm like, let's go 9 miles deep instead of like skate the surface of what's
Hmm.
possible. So if you want to connect, go to goodmancoachinginc.com and schedule a call with me, and I'll be happy to see how I can help in whatever way possible.
Perfect. I love that. And I'm so excited because I get to see you soon in real life in like exactly a month, I think.
Oh, so
So,
that's a for real
mhm.
date? I didn't know
Yeah,
you guys had settled on that. That's exciting.
I'll
I
put
can't
it
wait.
on your calendar.
Do you know what? It's not there, I don't think. So that's got to be why I didn't know about it.
Exactly. Yay. Thank you so much. This was so much fun. We're going to have to pick another book and I'm going to have to make you come back on so we could do it again.
I'm like you. I could talk all day about about things I'm passionate about. So thank you for the opportunity. And as always, if I can do something to help, just let me know.